Beijing at night has its own rhythm, one that moves silently between neon-lit streets, hidden alleyways, and restaurants where whispers are traded faster than food is served. But on one particular evening, the city's pulse slowed for two people whose lives have been under the relentless glare of the spotlight. Xu Kai and Tan Songyun, two names adored across China and beyond, decided to slip away from their public personas and meet for something that seemed so ordinary yet carried the weight of the extraordinary, a private dinner. What made this dinner remarkable was not simply that it happened, but how it unfolded behind closed doors, with shadows moving through candlelight, and the air thick with tension that only they could understand. For fans, it wasn't just dinner, it was a mystery, a carefully guarded secret that somehow managed to leave traces like breadcrumbs for the world to piece together. The evening began quietly. Xu Kai, known for his towering height and magnetic presence, arrived first. He wore something understated: dark jeans, a loose black sweater, a baseball cap pulled just low enough to shadow his face but not low enough to hide the familiar jawline that paparazzi could spot from across the street. The car he stepped out of disappeared almost as quickly as it came, as if to erase all evidence of his arrival. Inside, the restaurant was dimly lit, a place reserved not for the noisy elite but for those who wanted to disappear. It was a hidden gem in the Chaoyang district, a spot whispered about among Beijing's most discreet circles. No grand chandeliers, no blinding gold accents, just wood, warm light, and the faint notes of traditional Chinese music playing from a corner. The staff, trained in silence, knew better than to linger. Tan Songyun arrived 15 minutes later. Unlike Xu Kai, she didn't choose black. She wore a soft beige trench coat, her hair tucked neatly under a beret, the kind of look that made her blend into a crowd while still radiating a subtle elegance. She paused at the entrance as if scanning the room for hidden eyes, then followed the maître d' to a private booth tucked behind a folding screen. When their eyes met, it wasn't the smile of co-stars reuniting, it was something deeper, something unspoken, like the kind of relief you feel when you've been holding your breath too long and finally exhale. Xu Kai rose slightly, pulling the chair for her, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Tan Songyun smiled softly, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to hum. The first minutes were filled with laughter, hushed but genuine. They leaned closer across the table, their voices barely above whispers. For outsiders, it would have looked like nothing more than two friends catching up, but to those who knew them, their shared past in dramas, their rumored closeness, the scene painted a far more intricate picture. Then came the dishes. Steaming bowls of hot pot, plates of delicately arranged dumplings, stir-fried vegetables glistening under the candlelight. Xu Kai, known for his appetite, was quick to serve her first, carefully placing food in her bowl before taking any for himself. Tan Songyun teased him about it, laughing with that signature brightness that fans adored, but in this dim, private setting, it carried an intimacy that wasn't for cameras. But the most telling moment of the evening came when silence fell between them. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that only exists between two people who no longer need to fill every gap with words. Xu Kai leaned back slightly, his gaze fixed on her, and Tan Songyun, aware of the weight of his eyes, looked away briefly before meeting his gaze again. That simple exchange said more than any conversation could. Yet, what makes this dinner unforgettable isn't only what happened inside, it's what happened outside. Because secrets rarely stay secrets in Beijing. Unbeknownst to them, a curious shadow lingered near the restaurant. A passerby, perhaps, or maybe someone tipped off. A figure with a phone angled just right managed to capture a fleeting image, two silhouettes through the frosted glass, their outlines unmistakable. The photo would later circulate online, sparking wild speculation. Were they dating? Was it a business meeting? Or was this dinner something more, something they didn't want the world to know? Inside, oblivious to the outside world's buzz, Xu Kai reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers as he passed her a teacup. Tan Songyun didn't flinch. Instead, she allowed the moment to stretch, her fingers lingering just long enough for it to feel intentional. If anyone else had been present, they would have sworn the air thickened in that second. The staff noticed, of course. One waiter, later asked about that night, could only say, they laughed like they were the only people in the world, but when they grew quiet, it felt as though the room itself leaned closer to listen. Toward the end of the evening, Xu Kai stood, insisting on paying despite Tan Songyun's protests. They left separately, a strategy that spoke volumes. Shu Kai exited first, disappearing into the cool Beijing night, his car waiting discreetly at the corner. Tan Songyun left 10 minutes later, her trench coat pulled tighter as she blended into the evening crowd. To any outsider, it would have seemed like nothing. But for those who knew what to look for, it was everything. By the next morning, the whispers had already started. Fan forums lit up with theories, speculations, and carefully dissected screenshots of the blurry silhouette photo. Was it really them? Why Beijing? Why this particular restaurant? Theories multiplied. Some claimed it was purely professional, perhaps about a new project. Others argued it was personal, a continuation of a bond that had long existed beneath the surface of their public lives. And then there were the hopeless romantics, convinced that this was the proof they had been waiting for, that Shu Kai and Tan Songyun were more than just co-stars and colleagues. But what no one could deny was the spark. Whether professional or personal, the energy between them that night was palpable, undeniable. The kind of energy that doesn't fade easily. Perhaps the most fascinating detail is not that they met, but that they tried so hard to keep it hidden. Because in the world of entertainment, secrecy isn't just a shield, it's also a confession. The very act of keeping something quiet gives it meaning. That dinner in Beijing was not just about food, nor even about conversation. It was about presence. About two people who, for a few hours, decided to exist outside of the spotlight, to share something only they could fully understand. And though the world may never know the full truth of what was said, what was felt, or what was promised in that candlelit booth, one thing remains certain. Beijing will never forget the night Shu Kai and Tan Songyun tried to keep their dinner a secret and failed. Because some secrets are too powerful to stay hidden. What most people never realized about that private dinner in Beijing is how much more happened beyond the surface, the small gestures, the pauses, the looks that stretched longer than words ever could. After the first round of dishes arrived, Shu Kai poured tea for Tan Songyun, his hand steady but his eyes lingering just a fraction too long. She smiled in quiet amusement. It was a simple gesture, but fans who know him well would agree Shu Kai never lingers unless it means something. They started talking about their schedules, about the projects that were weighing them down. Shu Kai mentioned the late nights on set, the endless shoots, the physical exhaustion. Tan Songyun leaned in, her chin resting lightly on her palm, listening with the kind of focus that felt rare in their industry where everyone was always rushing. But what struck him most wasn't her sympathy, it was her laughter. Every time she laughed, her eyes curved into crescents, and for a moment, it pulled him out of the heavy reality of being Shu Kai, the star. Around her, he could just be Shu Kai, the man. At one point, a dish arrived that was slightly too spicy. Shu Kai, playful as always, teased her about it. "Don't tell me you can't handle it," he said, his grin boyish and teasing. She shot him a mock glare. "I can handle more than you think." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that comes when two people forget the world around them. But in that intimate booth, laughter didn't just echo, it lingered, coating the space with warmth. The waiter, careful and trained not to intrude, caught the fleeting moment when Shu Kai reached over to wipe a stray chili flake from the corner of Tan Songyun's lips. The gesture was subtle, but the way her laughter halted for a second and her eyes softened told the truth. This was no ordinary dinner. And then, the silence came again. Not the heavy silence of strangers but the comfortable pause of two people who had nothing to prove to one another. Shu Kai leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his gaze never leaving hers. "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that even the music seemed to hush. Tan Songyun's expression shifted. She didn't answer immediately. She took a sip of tea, her fingers trembling slightly as if the question carried a weight she wasn't prepared to lift. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes carrying both longing and restraint. "Every day," she whispered. It was in that moment, more than anything else, that the dinner stopped being just a dinner. It became a confession. Outside, the city moved as always, cars honking, neon lights flashing, strangers hurrying past. But inside, behind that folding screen, the world slowed for them. Shu Kai, ever the protective type, glanced briefly toward the entrance, his instincts sharp. He knew what it meant to be recognized, to have a private moment shattered in seconds. But when he turned back, the sight of Tan SONGYUN sitting across from him erased every trace of worry. What made the evening even more intriguing was the way they spoke about the past. They reminisced about their early collaborations, about the awkwardness of first meetings, the bloopers that never made it to the public eye. Tan SONGYUN giggled at how Shukai once forgot his lines because he was too distracted by her improvisation, while Shukai teased her about a scene where she nearly tripped but played it off flawlessly. Yet beneath the laughter, there was something unspoken, nostalgia mixed with longing. A reminder of how their bond had quietly deepened over the years. The most unforgettable moment, however, came when Shukai reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a simple charm, wrapped in red thread. He slid it across the table, his fingers brushing against hers as he did. "For luck," he said softly, his voice steady but his eyes betraying more. "I thought you might need it." Tan SONGYUN picked it up gently, her expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, not the public smile she wore at fan meetings, but the private one, the kind reserved for moments that matter. She tucked the charm carefully into her bag, her eyes glistening under the warm light. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. But Shukai heard it, and the quiet gratitude carried more weight than any grand gesture could. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate mango pudding, neither of them seemed interested in eating. Instead, their conversation drifted to the future. She asked him what he wanted beyond acting, beyond fame. He paused, thinking deeply before answering. "Peace," he said at last. "And maybe, someone who understands that peace doesn't mean loneliness." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Tan SONGYUN didn't reply, but her gaze lingered, filled with emotions she wasn't ready to voice. When the bill finally came, Shukai insisted on paying, his hand firmly covering hers when she tried to protest. That brief touch sparked something electric, a silent exchange that both of them pretended not to notice, but both surely felt. As they prepared to leave, the weight of reality pressed in. They knew the city outside wouldn't understand, that cameras and curious eyes could twist this dinner into something else entirely. Yet, as Shukai stood and offered his hand to help her up, Tan SONGYUN took it without hesitation. For a split second, they didn't care who was watching. The night ended with them leaving separately, but those few hours inside that quiet restaurant told a story no camera could capture fully, a story of longing, of comfort, of something fragile yet undeniable. The world might call it speculation, rumors, or fan fiction spun out of a single blurry photo. But for Shukai and Tan SONGYUN, that dinner wasn't about the world. It was about them. And sometimes, the most unforgettable moments are the ones no one was supposed to see. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more exclusive stories and mind-blowing moments from your favorite stars.